Vikings get sold as explorers and warriors. Almost nobody talks about the uncomfortable parts. The iron rings welded around captive women's necks, the blood oaths forced over enemy corpses, the marriage ceremonies conducted on fresh battlefields. Conquered women bound in sacred rites that made slavery permanent, legal ceremonies twisted into systematic terror. Which of these is legend, and which one sits in runic contracts and unmarked graves? The ceremonies were real. Legal documents, carved in stone, archaeological evidence from settlement sites across conquered territories. The Vikings didn't just take women as war prizes, they trapped them in religious marriages that destroyed identity and eliminated escape forever. If you value documented Viking and Norse-era history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from Icelandic law codes and archaeological evidence from Viking settlements. Now back to the story. 6 in the Danelaw, the Great Army sweeps through Northumbria. Standard procedure after victory: divide the land, enslave the population, but the women receive special treatment. Iron neck rings hammered closed while still hot. Blood ceremonies conducted over enemy graves. Marriage contracts carved in runic stone. The Vikings aren't just conquering territory, they're manufacturing wives. The neck rings aren't decorative. Archaeological evidence from mass graves shows iron collars welded shut, no clasps, no removal mechanism. The metal fused permanently around the neck. Chemical analysis reveals deliberate heating during application. The Vikings brand conquered women like livestock, property marks that advertise ownership and eliminate escape. Legal codes from Iceland preserve the ceremony details. The Gragas law describes blood marriage requirements. Conquered women must swear oaths over fresh enemy corpses. Blood from the battlefield mixed with sacred mead. Runic contracts that bind women to Viking husbands forever. Legal slavery disguised as divine marriage. The timing proves crucial. Blood marriages occur within hours of battlefield victory, before enemy reinforcements arrive, before conquered populations organize resistance. The Vikings understand that speed prevents rescue attempts, immediate ceremony, immediate ownership, immediate destruction of previous identity. Archaeological excavations at York reveal the industrial scale, mass wedding sites adjacent to battlefield graveyards, stone circles where multiple ceremonies occurred simultaneously, evidence of systematic processing. The Vikings operate marriage factories that convert conquered women into legal property within days of military victory. The oath requirements destroy previous identity completely. Conquered women forced to renounce their families publicly. Sworn statements rejecting their former gods. Blood promises to serve Viking husbands until death. The ceremonies eliminate every connection to previous life. Legal rebirth, as Norse's. Property. Contemporary chronicles describe the psychological warfare involved. Saxon women forced to marry Viking raiders who killed their fathers and brothers. Irish captives wed to Norse warriors over their children's graves. The Vikings' designs. Ceremonies to maximize trauma while creating legal ownership. The blood component serves multiple purposes. Enemy blood collected during battlefield killing, mixed with sacred substances during marriage ceremonies, conquered women forced to drink the mixture while swearing oaths. The Vikings make wives consume their people's blood as wedding ritual. If you value documented Viking and Norse-era history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from medieval law codes and settlement archaeology. Now back to the story. The legal framework ensures permanent ownership. Marriage contracts, carved in runic stone, witnessed by Norse communities, recorded in settlement law codes. The ceremonies create documentation that prevents later freedom claims. Legal slavery through religious marriage. Specialized tools facilitate the ceremonies. Iron neck rings forged in specific patterns. Branding implements for marking married women. Stone hammers for welding collars shut. Archaeological finds reveal standardized equipment for mass marriage processing. The settlement patterns show systematic implementation. Blood marriage sites at every major Viking conquest. Standardized ceremony locations near battlefield burial grounds. Evidence of coordinated application across conquered territories. The Vikings institutionalized forced marriage as conquest policy. Contemporary. Witness accounts describe the aftermath trauma. Conquered women who attempt suicide to avoid ceremony participation. Systematic prevention of escape through community surveillance. The Vikings create social structures that enforce marriage slavery through collective responsibility. The economic integration makes blood marriage profitable. Married women provide labor without wages. Children born from forced unions become Norse property. Land inheritance through marriage rights. The Vikings design ceremonies to generate long-term economic benefits from conquered populations. Archaeological bone analysis reveals the physical effects of neck ring wearing. vertebrae compression from iron collar weight, scarring patterns consistent with permanent restraint, skeletal evidence of systematic physical marking. The Vikings leave permanent physical evidence of ownership on conquered women's bodies. The religious justification provides legal protection for forced marriage. Sacred oaths that supersede previous legal obligations, divine sanction for conquest marriage, religious ceremonies that eliminate moral responsibility. The Vikings weaponize spiritual belief to justify systematic enslavement. Runic inscriptions preserve contract details, marriage agreements that specify ownership terms, property rights over wives and future children, legal obligations for conquered women's labor and reproduction. The Vikings document forced marriage with commercial precision. The ceremony protocols follow specific procedures, battlefield timing requirements, oath formulations and prescribed language, witness requirements for legal validity. The Vikings standardize forced marriage through detailed ritual specifications. Contemporary chronicles describe resistance attempts and their consequences. Women who refuse ceremony participation face immediate execution, community punishment for populations that hide marriage candidates. The Vikings eliminate resistance through systematic terror. The neck ring technology evolves over time, improved. Welding techniques for permanent attachment, religious symbols incorporated into collar designs, identification markings that indicate husband's identity. The Vikings develop specialized equipment for marriage slavery. Archaeological evidence from settlement sites reveals the scale of forced marriage programs. Burial grounds containing hundreds of women with neck ring trauma, evidence of systematic application across conquered territories, mass grave sites adjacent to marriage ceremony locations. The legal documentation creates permanent slavery, runic contracts that transfer property rights from conquest to marriage, written agreements that eliminate women's legal personhood, documentation that prevents freedom claims by conquered populations or outside authorities. The psychological conditioning begins before ceremonies, isolation from family members during preparation periods, forced cultural education about Norse customs, systematic breaking of resistance through controlled starvation and abuse. The Vikings prepare conquered women for ceremony compliance. Contemporary accounts describe the international reputation of blood marriage practices. Frankish chroniclers who document forced marriage as conquest policy, Saxon records that detail systematic marriage slavery, Irish annals describing blood ceremonies over battlefield graves. The settlement integration ensures permanent control, marriage obligations that require constant labor, community surveillance that prevents escape attempts, social structures that punish assistance to married captives. The Vikings create systems that enforce marriage slavery through collective responsibility. Archaeological analysis of marriage ceremony sites reveals evidence of mass processing. Stone circles capable of handling dozens of simultaneous ceremonies, battlefield locations with adjacent marriage facilities, evidence of coordinated application during major military campaigns. The economic benefits drive systematic implementation. Free labor for married captives, property inheritance through conquest marriage, child production for expanding Norse populations. The Vikings designed blood marriage as economic institution that generates long-term wealth from conquered territories. The legal framework eliminates escape possibilities, marriage contracts that supersede previous legal obligations, religious oaths that create spiritual binding, community enforcement that prevents assistance to married captives. The Vikings create legal traps that make freedom impossible. Contemporary witness accounts describe the ceremony aftermath. Conquered women displaying symptoms consistent with severe psychological trauma. Complete personality changes following forced marriage participation. Long-term mental health effects that persist throughout captivity. The religious integration provides spiritual justification, sacred oaths that create divine obligation, religious ceremonies that eliminate moral objections, spiritual binding that supersedes secular law. The Vikings use religious belief to normalize systematic enslavement. Archaeological evidence from specialized tools reveals technological sophistication, improved neck ring designs for permanent attachment, enhanced welding equipment for ceremony efficiency, standardized measurements for collar fitting. The Vikings develop industrial-level technology for marriage slavery. The documentation systems preserve evidence of systematic implementation. Runic records of marriage ceremony numbers, legal contracts specifying ownership terms, settlement records that track married captive populations. The Vikings maintain detailed documentation of their marriage slavery programs. The community participation creates cultural acceptance of forced marriage. Norse populations that witness ceremonies as normal conquest procedure. Children who observe blood marriage as standard practice. Social integration that normalizes systematic enslavement through religious ceremony. Contemporary chronicles describe the long-term effects on conquered populations. Communities that lose entire female populations to forced marriage. Cultural destruction through systematic removal of reproductive capacity, generational trauma that affects conquered territories for decades. The technological innovation improves ceremony efficiency, mass processing capabilities for handling multiple simultaneous marriages, improved restraint systems for managing resistant captives, enhanced documentation methods for recording legal ownership. The Vikings continuously refine their marriage. Slavery systems. Archaeological excavations reveal evidence of resistance and its consequences. Mass execution sites for women who refused ceremony participation, burial evidence of systematic killing for marriage refusal, community punishment sites for populations that hid marriage candidates. The legal enforcement creates permanent ownership systems, marriage contracts that transfer property rights permanently, religious obligations that eliminate freedom possibilities, community responsibility for preventing escape attempts. The Vikings design legal frameworks that make marriage slavery irreversible. The international trade creates markets for married captives, export systems for selling women already bound through blood marriage, commercial networks that value conquest wives for their legal status, international demand for captives already processed through marriage slavery. Contemporary accounts describe the psychological warfare aspects. Forced marriages conducted over family graves to maximize trauma. Ceremony timing designed to prevent rescue attempts. Public nature of blood marriage to terrorize remaining populations. The settlement archaeology reveals the scale of systematic implementation. Marriage ceremony sites at every major Viking conquest location. Evidence of coordinated application across conquered territories. Mass processing facilities for handling large captive populations during marriage seasons. The preparation facilities operate like processing centers for human property conversion, holding areas adjacent to battlefield sites where conquered women await ceremony assignment, standardized procedures for evaluating marriage candidates based on age, health, and resistance levels, quality control systems that determine appropriate husband assignments. Archaeological evidence from Dublin reveals specialized architecture for mass blood marriage processing, underground chambers with drainage systems for ceremony preparation, stone platforms designed for simultaneous oath-taking by multiple captives, acoustic features that amplify screams to terrorize waiting populations. The victim selection criteria prioritize psychological impact over simple demographics. Daughters of defeated nobles chosen for maximum community trauma. Wives of slain enemy leaders selected to demonstrate total conquest. Religious women targeted to destroy spiritual resistance among conquered populations. Contemporary Frankish chronicles describe the international shock at blood marriage practices, diplomatic protests from neighboring kingdoms about forced marriage policies, commercial boycotts of Norse traders known for marriage slavery. The Vikings' conquest methods become internationally notorious. The legal documentation reveals sophisticated property transfer systems, runic contracts that specify inheritance rights for children born from forced unions, property clauses that transfer conquered women's previous assets to Viking husbands, legal frameworks that eliminate any possibility of future freedom claims. Chemical. Analysis of neck ring materials shows deliberate design for permanent attachment. Iron alloys specifically chosen for welding durability. Metal compositions that resist cutting or removal attempts. The Vikings engineer restraint systems that make escape physically impossible. The ceremony timing coordination requires military precision. Marriage schedules synchronized with raiding seasons, battlefield wedding sites prepared in advance of conquest campaigns, logistical planning that ensures immediate ceremony capability following military victory, archaeological. Bone analysis reveals evidence of systematic malnutrition during preparation periods, deliberate starvation to weaken resistance before marriage ceremonies, controlled feeding schedules designed to maintain appearance while eliminating physical strength. The Vikings' perfect hunger as a compliance tool. The religious integration creates spiritual justification for conquest marriage. Sacred oaths that invoke Norse gods as witnesses to forced unions, ceremonial elements that transform enslavement into divine obligation, religious language that eliminates moral objections to systematic marriage slavery. Contemporary witness accounts describe the psychological conditioning techniques used during preparation, isolation methods that break social bonds with family and community, systematic humiliation designed to destroy self-worth and resistance, cultural violation training that prepares women for Norse integration. The economic calculations drive systematic implementation of blood marriage programs, cost-benefit analysis showing long-term profit from forced marriage versus simple slavery, labor productivity measurements for married captives versus traditional slaves. The Vikings apply commercial logic to conquest marriage policies. Archaeological. Excavations at Stamford Bridge reveal evidence of ceremony evolution over time. Earlier burial sites showing crude restraint methods, later graves indicating technological improvements in permanent bondage systems, systematic refinement of marriage, slavery techniques across decades. The community enforcement mechanisms ensure permanent control over married captives. Neighborhood surveillance systems that monitor conquest wives constantly. Social obligations that make Norse populations complicit in marriage slavery enforcement. Collective responsibility for preventing escape attempts. Contemporary chronicles describe specialized raiding tactics designed for marriage candidate acquisition. Military strategies that prioritize capture over killing during female population targeting. Coordinated sweeps designed to maximize young women available for forced marriage ceremonies. The pharmaceutical knowledge extends to marriage ceremony. Drugging. Psychoactive substances administered during oath-taking to ensure compliance. Chemical compounds that create memory gaps around ceremony trauma. Drug combinations that facilitate acceptance of forced marriage obligations. Archaeological. Evidence from settlement sites reveals the scale of reproductive control through blood marriage. Genetic analysis showing systematic breeding programs using conquered women. Population genetics indicating planned offspring production from forced unions. The Vikings weaponized reproduction through conquest marriage. The legal enforcement creates permanent ownership documentation, stone carvings that record marriage contracts for posterity, runic inscriptions that establish property rights over conquered women and future children, legal frameworks that make marriage slavery hereditary. Contemporary accounts describe the international trade implications of blood marriage practices, diplomatic tensions with kingdoms that refuse to recognize forced marriage contracts, commercial complications from trading partners who object to marriage slavery. The Vikings' practices create international legal conflicts. The ceremony protocols include specific trauma-inducing elements designed to break resistance completely. Forced participation in rituals that violate previous religious beliefs. Oath requirements that force women to renounce their families publicly. Blood-drinking ceremonies that maximize psychological horror. Archaeological analysis of mass grave sites near marriage ceremony locations reveals evidence of systematic killing for ceremony refusal. Execution methods used on women who resist blood marriage participation. Burial patterns showing community punishment for populations that hide marriage candidates. The technological development improves ceremony efficiency over time. Mass processing capabilities for handling hundreds of simultaneous marriages, improved restraint systems for managing large groups of resistant captives, enhanced documentation methods for recording legal ownership of conquered populations. Contemporary witness testimonies describe the aftermath effects on conquered communities. Population trauma, from systematic removal of female reproductive capacity. Cultural destruction through forced integration of women into Norse society. Generational impacts on conquered territories that lose entire female populations. The religious, calendar coordinates, blood marriage timing with sacred festivals. Seasonal ceremonies that combine conquest celebration with mass marriage processing. Religious observances that incorporate forced marriage as divine worship. Sacred timing that aligns conquest marriage with Norse spiritual requirements. Archaeological evidence from specialized marriage ceremony implements reveals industrial-scale operation. Mass-produced neck rings in standardized sizes. Ceremony platforms designed for processing dozens of simultaneous marriages. Standardized branding equipment for marking married conquest women. The psychological warfare extends beyond individual ceremonies to community terrorization. Public nature of blood marriage designed to demonstrate total conquest. Ceremony scheduling that ensures maximum witness attendance from conquered populations. Strategic placement of marriage sites to maximize psychological impact. Contemporary chronicles describe the training systems for ceremony personnel, specialized priests who perform mass marriage rituals, legal scribes who document conquest marriage contracts, military coordinators who manage large-scale ceremony logistics. The Vikings professionalize conquest marriage through formal training. The settlement integration requires systematic destruction of previous identity, name changes forced on conquered wives to eliminate birth identity, cultural education programs that replace original customs with Norse practices, language requirements that forbid communication in native tongues. Archaeological excavations reveal evidence of resistance networks among married captives despite permanent restraint systems, hidden communication methods between conquest wives, coordinated suicide attempts to escape marriage slavery, underground assistance networks that attempt to help married women escape. The economic benefits calculation shows marriage slavery profitability over traditional conquest methods, labor productivity analysis from forced wives versus purchased slaves, reproductive value assessment of children born from conquest marriages, cost efficiency studies of marriage processing versus alternative control methods. Contemporary accounts describe the international reputation effects on Viking diplomatic relations, neighboring kingdoms that refuse marriage alliances with Norse leaders known for conquest marriage, trade restrictions imposed by Christian kingdoms that object to blood marriage practices. The legal framework, evolution, shows systematic refinement of marriage slavery law. Earlier runic codes with basic ownership provisions, later legal developments that close loopholes in conquest marriage contracts, continuous improvement of legal frameworks that make escape impossible. Archaeological, bone chemistry analysis reveals evidence of long-term health effects from permanent neck ring wearing, skeletal deformation from constant iron collar pressure, nutritional deficiency patterns consistent with systematic maltreatment of married captives, physical evidence of decades-long suffering. The ceremony documentation preserves evidence of systematic implementation across conquered territories, marriage contract databases showing thousands of forced unions, settlement records tracking married captive populations over generations, legal archives demonstrating industrial-scale marriage slavery operations. Contemporary witness accounts describe the psychological conditioning of Viking children through exposure to conquest marriage, young Norse who observe forced marriage as normal conquest procedure, children who participate in ceremony preparation as cultural education, generational normalization of marriage slavery. The technological innovation creates permanent identification systems for married captives, branding techniques that mark conquest wives with husband identification, tattooing methods that indicate settlement assignment, physical modification systems that make escape recognition immediate. Archaeological evidence from cemetery sites reveals the ultimate fate of conquest wives, burial patterns showing systematic killing of married captives when no longer useful, grave goods indicating status as property rather than family members, evidence that blood marriage leads inevitably to disposal. A Saxon chronicler's account from 885 near York describes the lasting impact. The women who wore iron speak not their birth names. Archaeological excavations around the settlement show why. Mass grave sites containing evidence of ceremony resistance, neck ring fragments showing welding marks, runic marriage contracts carved in stone, skeletal remains showing decades of iron collar wear. The Vikings didn't just force women into blood marriage. They created legal slavery so complete that conquered women lost their very identity, becoming Norse property bound by sacred oaths that eliminated every possibility of freedom or return to their former lives, living as walking ghosts until their usefulness ended in unmarked graves.